Step into the realm of limitless imagination with Beyond the Art, where Indigenous creativity knows no bounds. Join us on a captivating journey through Indigenous art and innovation.
Together, let's delve into the depths of imagination, pushing boundaries with guests from diverse sectors of the Native American art world, each sharing their unique creative vision and inspiring journeys.
Join us for exclusive interviews, thought-provoking discussions, and uplifting stories. Welcome to Beyond the Art. I'm your host, Craig Laughlin.
Hello, and I'm Joe Williams.
Today we have with us Dyani White Hawk. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, let's start with your journey. Can you share with us how your dual upbringing, both Native and non-Native, has influenced your artistic path?
That's a long story. Hold on one second.
No worries.
I also just realized I need to tell my husband not to call me for the next hour and a half. Okay. Otherwise, we'll be listening to my phone ring. Okay, so my journey from now, my entire life journey in the next 20 minutes. No, I'll try to make it shorter than that. But just some quick summaries, some quick bullet points, I guess. My mom is Sichangu Lakota, so born in Rosebud, South Dakota. My dad is German and Welsh American. I was born in Madison, Wisconsin, raised in Madison. And an important part of our life journey also is that my mom was adopted off of Rosebud by white missionaries pre the era of ICWA. And really solidly within the timeline when over a third of all Native babies were being adopted off reservations and placed in white homes before ICWA was implemented, and as a follow-up tactic to boarding schools as another assimilation effort. So our family story has a story of disconnection and reconnection as well, which is, an important part of my journey because it inevitably affected my upbringing. So my mom was reconnected. Well, we were reconnected, but, through the work of my mother in the 80s. And so I have early childhood memories of having the label, knowing I was an Indian kid, but not having a whole lot of context to it. Right. And then as, throughout the years, as the relationships with our family were nurtured and continued, and we just did a lot of traveling back and forth between Wisconsin and South Dakota to spend time with family. And my mom worked really hard to make sure that I didn't suffer the same kind of disconnection that she did, because she knew what that felt like and didn't want that for me. And so it was, my life experiences have really been shaped and molded by, kind of typical American youth experience as far as like growing up in the city. And then throughout my younger years and into my, young adulthood and adulthood, being raised also like within the Native community in the city, and then going onto tribal colleges and a whole lot of what felt like, back and forth in a lot of ways. Right. I grew up in my younger years. I really, really was into snowboarding and skateboarding and rave and hip hop culture and music scene, and just being, I played a lot. I delivered pizzas for like 7 years, worked at skate shops, and I've done a whole slew of all sorts of different kinds of work, different gigs. But I was always creating. Making has always been my favorite thing to do ever since I was little. And it's always something that I have been drawn to and come back to perpetually, and something that, I was really grateful that my mom nurtured, throughout my life. and encouraged, and, just did what she could to make sure I had things to make with, And in high school, oh man, my life journey. It's a long story. Okay, so the first high school I went to, I nearly dropped out, was failing. The last quarter that I was there, I had an A in art and was failing everything else. And, was really at a risk of failing out of high school. And my mom recognized that, the school I was at was not a good fit, and got me enrolled in an alternative high school. And I thrived there. I actually learned that, like, when education's done right, I really dug it. I really enjoyed it. I had wonderful teachers in what felt like real classes, because they weren't just teaching history as a bulk subject, but they were teaching, they had Native American history classes and African American history classes. And we called our teachers by their first names, and they didn't care where we sat in the classroom as long as we were focused and engaged. They evaluated everybody's learning styles upon entrance to the school so that they knew how to address each kid. You had to sign a participation agreement. And so they had like a zero tolerance policy. So you had to, if you're going to, if you were a kid that was using at the time, you had to wait till the end of the school day. It's just a different level of community and participation and respect at that school that I think I also, my artistic journey was nurtured there too, because I had a really great art teacher, and I took photography classes and drawing. And throughout my younger years, those are two of the things I did the most. I drew a lot in sketchbooks, and I practiced photography, learned how to do beadwork, and those were the kind of three things that I was doing in my younger years. And then I graduated in 94 and worked and played and hung out and enjoyed life for 6 years. And then in 2000, I was finally ready to go to college. And I went to Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas. And I went to Haskell. I was aware of, and I had a desire to go to the Institute of American Indian Arts. But I was living in Wisconsin, and my mom was a single mom, and my mom had a disability, and we just didn't have cash, so it was when I was working full time, whatever I had was, the funds that I had to get myself to college. And getting to New Mexico from Wisconsin at that age, at that time in my life, and then having money to pay tuition too, felt like this insurmountable obstacle that I didn't know how to tackle. But I felt like I could get to Kansas, and the tuition or the fees that you have to pay at Haskell were much lower than the tuition at II at the time. And so I sold some snowboarding equipment that I had won in a contest, and that's how I got enough gas money and funds to drive to Kansas. So then I got to Kansas, and Haskell doesn't have an art department, but they had art classes. So I took as many art classes as I could, and totally enjoyed those. And then I got my associate's degree in elementary education, thinking that I would, maybe I would teach art at some point. Met my husband, had a Haskell Rascal, our daughter. It's all part of the journey.
Right.
Our daughter was born in 2002. And then I tried to go to KU because I got my associates, and I was waiting for my husband to get his bachelor's degree. And KU's right down the road, and they have this reputable art program. And I was like, well, I could go start getting my bachelor's degree there while I wait for Dyani to graduate. And so I enrolled there, and I went to 1 week of classes, and I got really pissed off in the first week, and I was like, this is not for me. They I just got done coming out of Haskell. I was there. I got my associates, but I was enrolled for 3 years because I had a detour in my classes. It just took a little bit longer. And so, I had just come out of 3 years worth of schooling taught from an Indigenous perspective, and then went to KU, and I heard the syllabus for Art History 101, and it was all Euro-American art history.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like raising my hand. I'm like, are we going to cover any, like, I don't know, pre-Columbian era art or any Indigenous art or anything else? And she was like, well, yeah, but that's a different class. And I just remember at that time I wanted to like throw up the bird and blaze out of there, but I didn't. I kept it to myself, and I was just like, I left, and I was so mad because it was just like that one response. Well, yeah, but that's a different class. Like Art History 101, that's what's on this syllabus. That's what it said to me, and I was just like, I can't with this place. So it didn't last. And I went home and I told Danny about it, and he was like, you want to go to IAI. You don't want to go to KU. Just drop out, wait for me to finish, and we'll move to New Mexico. So that's what we did. So I worked until he was done, and then we moved to Santa Fe, and I got my BFA at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And that's really where I had my first real painting instruction. I never really had access to like any painting, any formal painting instruction before I got to IAI. But I knew I wanted to paint. Like I inherently just knew that I craved this thing from a pretty young age. And so I made my first painting to submit with my portfolio to get into IAI. And then once I was there, I really immersed myself in painting and in the traditional arts classes. So I, continued refining my skills and abilities in beadwork and Lakota art forms. And I learned how to do quill work when I was at IAI, and dug deep into painting. And then thanks to Norman Akers, who's my painting professor at the time, I went on to grad school. I wouldn't have gone on to grad school if it wasn't for Norman. I have to say that because Norman was like, what are you considering grad school? And it's a little embarrassing to say, but at the time I was like, that sounds interesting. Tell me about it. Like, I just didn't know that I guess I just didn't know that I could go to grad school and continue, and get an MFA. I just hadn't been introduced to
that pathway.
Yeah. And so it was really Norman that was like, and then he told me where I was going to go. And I pushed back and I was like, no, because he wanted me to go to UW Madison, which is where I grew up and happily moved away from. And he's like, no, you really need to go there because they got a great program and they got Native faculty and they got, it's a really strong painting department. And I pushed back and said, no. And then I finally submitted and was like, okay, I'll throw in my application to UW as well as these other places. And then UW did end up being the best fit. So I got my MFA in 2011, moved to the Twin Cities where my mom had been living for a really long time already. So it had been home base for a long time. And so we moved there full time. Then I curated the All My Relations gallery for 4 years. With All My Relations is a contemporary Native art gallery in Minneapolis. So I curated that space and ran that gallery for 4 years and then transitioned into full-time studio practice in 2015, which I've been doing ever since.
Well, your work beautifully bridges Lakota art forms with traditionally seen as modern art. How do you approach merging these two distinct yet interconnected worlds in your practice and in your art form when you start creating?
Okay, say the way you said it I know what you're trying to ask, but I want to make sure I'm actually responding to the way you said it. So give it to me again.
Sure. Well, how do you approach merging these two distinct yet interconnected worlds in your practice and your art form when you start creating your vision and what you want to incorporate into your art?
Well, I think for me, it's really natural. It came out very naturally through the course of my studies. Because I went to tribal colleges and because I was really taught art history, first from an Indigenous perspective and later from a Western perspective when I went to graduate school. I was grounded in, our art forms, Lakota art forms and other Indigenous art forms first, right? And then went to mainstream university and had to immerse myself in mainstream American academia and learn that form of teaching and form of storytelling, because it really is just about who's telling the story, whose perspective are we looking at our shared stories through, And so while I was in graduate school, I had to play catch up and figure out and learn a lot of the history of painting, of easel painting, that my peers had already had as undergraduates, and that I had to kind of catch up and learn. And so that was a self-assigned, all right, I got to play catch up. I got to learn these different movements. I got to learn, what my peers are talking about. And in doing so, I figured out the eras of easel painting that I was most attracted to, which was the eras of abstraction in specifically abstract expressionism, but most specifically in the eras of stripe and color field painting, and some in minimalism, and so it merges and goes across a few of the different timelines. But what I kept figuring out is the people that I was most attracted to, the painters I was most attracted to, I would be reading about them and learning about them, and then I would figure out this person was a collector of Indigenous art, or this person was living adjacent to Indigenous people, or this person was influenced by Indigenous art, or there was just all of these intersections that came out. And I was like, oh, that's why I keep falling in love with your work, because when I look at your work, what I dig about it is that it looks like ours. And so that's what I was responding to. I was like, oh, I love those stripes. They remind me of our work. I love that color palette. It, looks like Lakota beadwork. I loved it, and so I would be falling in love with the ways that their painting reminded me of our work, what was familiar to me. And so that for me was okay, this cyclical pattern of Indigenous art and then, life intersections between non-Indigenous and Indigenous painting practices or artistic expression practices that inevitably are going to happen because of our coexistence on this land base. But for me, what stood out so strongly was that the way that the history is written, those influences on the quote unquote Western masters are written up until now as side notes, they were, collecting at and looking at Indigenous art. Aren't they geniuses for looking at these people's work and making these paintings that are, and without recognizing the genius of the Indigenous artists that exist as well, that are making work that is so strong and has such agency and beauty and expertise in it that is influencing people from outside of their culture as well, right? So that the valuing, placing equal value on artistic expression across humanity, those were the gaps that I saw. And so those are the gaps that I started naturally kind of questioning and thinking about and making work from that place of wanting to create conversations that disrupt those hierarchies, that get us to a place where we're recognizing equal contributions of artistic expression and recognizing the reality of our relationships, as opposed to like there's this story in this class and this story in this class and this story in this gallery and that story in that gallery. It's not the truth. The truth is our cross-cultural relationships and experiences. So I know that doesn't get into the hard, like, how do you do it? Like when you started the question, how is it done? But it does come from the questioning first. And then there's the physical building of that, the choices that I make when I approach a canvas or a multimedia work or a sculpture or whatever it's going to be. It first comes from those sources of questioning and inspiration and just wanting to push forward, I guess, a dialogue that I think is more just a stronger critical thinking,
Makes sense.
Yeah, that actually leads to the question about how you decide which medium in particular or concept that you choose, because you work across a variety of media, right? Painting and sculpture to performance. What kind of goes into that decision-making process?
It depends. So I really think at my core, I am a painter and a beadworker. Those are, the two things that I crave the most. I've learned that when I'm only painting, I miss beadwork, and when I'm only doing beadwork, I miss painting. And so I have to constantly fulfill those things. But there's times when the two-dimensional piece, the pigment on the canvas or the beadwork, don't fulfill the desire to tap into a particular topic, or they don't either have the malleability, or they don't have the history embedded into the materials, or they don't take up enough space, or they don't speak out loud, or they don't. There's times when the concept just calls for something else. So, I have a few pieces that are video pieces in a video installation, photo installation, some public art works done in glass mosaic and ceramic mosaic. And each time, I do one of a piece like that, it's really about following, how do I get this concept across in the strongest way possible? And so to give a precise example, there's a multi-screen or multi-monitor, multi-channel video installation titled Listen. Joe, you curated that body of work into an exhibition, and there's multiple monitors in that installation, minimally 8, but there's 11 videos so far, and it's something that I'm going to allow myself to build on over the years. But in each monitor, there's footage of an Indigenous woman speaking her language on her homelands. And that piece came from thinking about how challenging it is to deal with and face the tremendous chasms of knowledge that the majority of the U.S. population has in regards to its understanding of Native history, tribal federal government relations, contemporary Native people and communities. That chasm is so big, and it affects. Like I was thinking about it first, about how it affects me as an artist, because I would have curatorial visits with curators that just don't know what I'm talking about, and I had to start lectures, and it's like I feel like I often have to give history lessons before I can get into what my work's talking about, so that I can catch them up, so that they understand, so that they can understand it a little bit deeper, so they're not walking out there oblivious to what I just said. There's just, and there's times when I really think that lack of knowledge of our history and contemporary selves stands in the way of curators and art administrators and people that are there making choices. If they don't understand what you're referencing, if they have no connection to the things that you're talking about, it's a lot harder for them to get excited about your work. If they can decode somebody else's work because somebody else is making a reference to a piece of American history that is front of mind for them, or to a piece of like mainstream art historical narrative, and they're like, oh, I get it. Oh, that's brilliant, your critique on that. And I see, they can decode and, read it in a way that I think has been challenging for folks to really see and understand Native artwork. So I was thinking about this thing, and I was like, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you deal with an entire nation's lack of education and in the history of Indigenous people on the land which they live on? And it's like, but we don't have control of the education system. So I don't know how you can deal with that. And that felt impossible. And so I was like, well, if that feels impossible, and that's not something we can fix in a day, a week, a year, a decade, but maybe we can at least tell people that the chasm is there. And that's where Listen came out of, is just trying to create something that expressed to people the tremendous lack of knowledge that they are most likely unaware that they even have. So by presenting these, multi-channel videos, folks get to walk into a gallery and walk up to a monitor and hear this Native woman speaking her language for upwards of 5 to 6 minutes. And we don't provide translations, but you can see the person's name, the tribe, the language they're speaking, and the land where it was filmed, their homelands. And then the museum didactics asks the audience to think about how, if you were to just be out in the public, how many languages could you identify by sound? So if you stop and make that list for yourself, be like, okay, Spanish, French, Italian, German,
the standards,
you could go down the list. You can, identify Chinese from Japanese. You can identify and then depending on where you live, you might also be like, Hmong is super familiar. We're in the Twin Cities, or Somali is super familiar. Just you might not know a single word, but you might be able to be like, oh, I know what language they're speaking. And that list is pretty long. You'd be when you sit down and do that exercise for yourself tonight, the list is pretty long. You might get upwards of 20 languages that you can just be like, I know what it sounds like. And then it conversely asks people to think about how many Indigenous languages they could identify by sound.
Probably 0 for most.
For a lot of people, it's going to be 0.
Yeah.
For some, it might be 1 or 2 if they've lived adjacent to, or had relationships with. And then to just stop and think about what that means, that they don't even know what the languages from the land that they live on sound like. And that it's probably never even crossed their minds.
Yeah.
So that I didn't feel like I could get that across in a painting. That took language speakers. It took collaboration. My friend Rizal Benali, who's a Oglala Lakota and Dene videographer, filmmaker, she helped. I'm not a filmmaker, so she helped bring that piece to life. And, it took the collaboration of all of the people that we went and filmed with to do that. And the experience for people, from what I've heard is profound, and the beauty in it also is that they get this gift where they get to have introduction to at least 8 languages, like the sound and the cadence of at least 8 languages as they traverse the different monitors. And that's a gift, right? For them to be able to be like, oh, wow, like Ojibwe sounds really different from Lakota, like, and how beautiful is that? And it's connected to a real life living human being today, So yeah, that's not something I could do in paint and beads, or I didn't feel like I could do in paint and beads. So it just really depends on what the conversation is.
You've taken me back to the She Gives exhibition from a few years ago, and mentioning the didactics. I remember the how that was spelled out there. I think I still have the panel actually.
Oh, cool!
It was such an experience to be able to walk into that space and hear all those languages, especially in a space that's a non-native space like that in the middle of the city. It was absolutely a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. It was, I'm really grateful for your support in that show. It opened up right at the beginning of the pandemic.
Timing.
It killed me because for 2 months, all our doors were shut, and this beautiful exhibition sat in the dark. We couldn't open the doors.
Yep. But then they opened, and it probably didn't get to as many people as it would have if the pandemic didn't happen. But I'm guessing the people that did come probably needed it in that time, Absolutely. I mean, to be filled up by something, to be filled up by beauty, to be filled up by inspiration, and thought, to let your mind run, at a time when we were locked down in so many ways. I think that's okay.
Absolutely. Great. She handled the next question. So.
I know. It was a perfect segue.
It is.
Well, Dyani, congratulations on your recent accolades. How do these recognitions impact your work and your ability to advocate for Native arts and artists?
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a good question. I mean, I think that some of it I will continuously be learning, on how it affects my work and how it will continue to support my work, and just the journey through the field, through my practice and what I want to do. There's some really obvious statistical data kind of points, that you can point to. The monetary awards allow you the ability to build with a little less fear. When you're earlier in your journey and you're having to make a lot of choices from financial survival, it's a different. I mean, you could still make phenomenally beautiful work, and we have examples of that throughout our history everywhere we go. It's one of the most beautiful things about that I love sharing with people is just the artistic rigor of Native people, despite the challenges that we've faced, is such a testament to the spirit of Native folks. And so I just want to start by saying that you don't need a lot to make amazing work, and also participation in a studio practice where you're wanting to create works that help push forward a dialogue within museum and gallery spaces is a different journey. It oftentimes requires larger foundational or financial backing, for you to be able to make the kind of works, to have the kind of impact that you want to have in that space. And so having, received awards that have like substantial financial backing has been really important in allowing me to be able to dream really big and to make things that are really aspirational and challenge me, so some more like concrete examples is in this. I'm sitting in a studio space now that we've just recently added on to my original, or not original, but my current studio space. And so we're expanding physically, which feels really good. I'm excited. I have 11 folks that work with me at the studio. That are, a huge number of those people are my relatives and community members, and it's not all full time. There's full time, part time, floaty kind of time, but I love that I'm able to share kind of the bounty that is the studio practice with people in my family and in my community, and that's something that I feel like is one of the biggest benefits right now is like, bringing folks in allows us to make bigger, more ambitious work, but it also kind of like spreads the love of that support, so that it's paying more people's bills and hopefully supporting more life joy. And then, beyond the like money part, I was invited to give the commencement speech at II this year and was given an honorary doctorate degree. And
that's fantastic. Congrats on that as well.
That's amazing.
Thanks. Yeah. That one really hit me like that. I got that phone call and I hung up the phone, and Dr. Martin called me, and I cried after that phone call. I was just like, it was so meaningful to come from II, to come from my alma mater, to come from a tribal school, and from my community, like that. I wouldn't want it from somewhere else. I mean, I'm not saying that I would be like, oh, that's horrible, but like, it means a lot, to be grounded in the places that nurtured me, to have that honoring from the place that nurtured me. And it means a lot for me to stand on that stage and give that commencement speech after receiving that honor to a group full of graduates that are coming from a similar path, and to be able to encourage them and be able to express to them that, your journey may not be a straight shot. It may be a little twisty turny. None of our journeys look the same.
True.
The minds that are coming out of tribal colleges are extremely important. The knowledge that's coming out of tribal college systems is extremely important. Their voices are really needed. And to be able to, for me, what I feel like every time I get kind of like a tick in my belt, or an opportunity out in the mainstream art world, I get really excited because I'm like, I needed to see what that success looked like when I was coming up. Like we have to be able to see what's possible so that we can dream towards it and then eventually be able to dream beyond it, But like, if you can't see it, if it's not there, it feels insurmountable. I want to give one example and then I'll pass it back to you guys. But I remember when I was in graduate school, I was doing research on fellowships postgraduate school. How do you get some of these fellowships that help you continue to be an artist? And I was researching different fellowships and looking at who their past recipients were. And the Joan Mitchell Foundation was one of the only like non-native fellowship resources that I saw multiple years of Indigenous recipients that I was like, oh man, maybe one year I could get a Joan Mitchell fellowship. Look, they supported these other Native artists. They're obviously like looking and watching, and you know, they're like, where other places, like I was just like, are there any Native people in here? Like, and I did. The Joan Mitchell was one of the very first like fellowships outside of the Native arts field that I did get, and that felt like everything. And then, so anyways, I just know how important it is for anybody, for any of us Native artists, for the whole field, you know, like anytime one of our peers receives some, you know, significant support and celebration from the mainstream art field, and from within, you know, the Native art field too, that provides examples for other young people coming up that like they can do this thing, you know, they can walk this path and they can find support, and it is possible, you know. So that means a lot to me.
So you've participated in residencies around the world, including Australia, Russia, and Germany. How have these international experiences influenced your work and understanding of global Indigenous practices?
It's amazing. It's profoundly beautiful. The only residencies that I've done have been in cultural exchanges with other Indigenous folks. Like I haven't done any other residencies that are just like go make art in this other place. And so because of that, you know, I've gotten to spend time with Indigenous people in these other countries, in Botswana and Russia and Australia. And it is, and I've done a residency in Germany, but that wasn't with this no, it's not the same. That one was through Mosaics. But the most beautiful thing about spending time with other Indigenous folks in other areas of the globe is you really get to see the commonalities that exist across the globe. It's wild. Because there are times when you're like, we have the exact same story about the same constellation. Like you've crafted homes that look just like ours. Like your baby carriers look exactly like ours. There's just like so many. Like in Russia, they have the folks that I was with. They have that would look like teepees. They're called chums, and they're just shorter than ours because the people are shorter and the trees are shorter. The trees are smaller. So the chums are smaller than our teepees. And their like social arrangement inside the chum was familiar in the way that we socially arrange ourselves inside a teepee. There was like all these similarities. And it was, and they have cradle boards. Like it's just, you know, they're like all the way in the Arctic Circle. I'm like, man, yeah, that's so much like us because they follow the path of the reindeer in the way that our folks followed buffalo. And so, like, of course, you know, just nomadic living and what it, you know, what it takes to do that. Like there was just so much beauty in seeing common practices. And in Australia, they have nearly the same, at least with the group of people that I was with, they had nearly the same story behind the Milky Way as we do. Just like, how do you get that far across the globe and come to the same conclusions about the same celestial body? Like, it's just is so beautiful. And so just to have the blessing of having a wider understanding of our connections across humanity, across the space, even if we don't have physical contact, and it kind of, it opens your eyes as well to, beyond humanity, what our connections are,
I think if
beautiful
people
thing.
if people had a better understanding of that we're more alike than we are different, there would be greater ease of understanding one another.
Yeah. I yearn for that, and I think that's part of our jobs as artists is to constantly be speaking to that thing, constantly. I think I believe anyways, and I don't necessarily say that it's the job for everybody. Everybody gets to decide what they want to do, but I really do think that we have a beautiful gift in our lives and our practices of being able to speak to a lot of people through working as an artist, right? And when you're doing that, it's a form of storytelling. And when we are sharing our stories with each other, we get to learn about one another's humanity. We get to learn about our commonalities. We get to learn about the intersections that exist in those spaces. And we are better equipped to be compassionate for one another when we have that. When we are blocked off from each other's humanity, social media, driving in your car, all those times when you get to you all the humanity in the person is blocked. It's just a lot easier to forget their humanity. It's a lot easier to forget how much they are like you. It's a lot easier to not see their pain, to not see their challenges, to not see their gifts, their joy, the love. And as artists, I think we share our stories, and that helps create greater connectivity, I think, or at least that's the goal for me.
Your work is in some of the most prestigious museums globally, such as the Guggenheim and the Whitney. What does it mean to you to have your pieces in these collections? And how do you hope that they contribute to the broader art dialogue?
It means a lot to me because it's not been the norm. It's, we are, as Native artists, we are finally getting support from these, huge American museums that are meant to be, they are our public art museums, therefore they are supposed to reflect the public. And we are part of the public, and we're the original public of this space. So for the work of Indigenous artists not to be in these collections has been a huge miss. And that is starting to be corrected, but that journey is really in its infancy, There's just a small handful of folks that are in those spaces now. They're in there, and I'm really grateful for them. And every time I see something, I'm cheering people on, because the reality is that the more voices that are represented in these spaces, the stronger the collective narrative is, but also just the more honest our artistic storytelling is when we're presenting the history of art making of this continent in these American museum spaces. We want that to be as honest as possible. That means it needs to be as inclusive as possible. And so it means a lot to me because if our work is not in those spaces, then our stories are not being shared. Our perspectives are not being shared. And our perspectives are a foundational part of the storyline of this country. So it would be complete bullshit if they weren't in there. Right. Because you're not starting at the beginning, and you're not you're just skipping over. Yeah. And that is perpetuating a lot of the BS that is the way that U.S. history has been taught and continues to be taught. So when our voices, when voices of BIPOC folks at large, when voices of any underrepresented or oppressed community is specifically and strategically not included, then you're skirting the truth, right? So it means everything to me that they're in these spaces, not just for my own clout or like, line items on my resume, but for a real genuine hope that like we're moving towards healthier models in our public art spaces, that are honest models, that are, hopefully asking us to be really critically thinking about our past and where we want to go in the future.
Absolutely. Well, Dyani, what projects are you currently working on or planning on for the future? And how do you envision your work evolving in the next few years? And the story, is the story going to be the same story that you want to tell, or is it translating as you grow as an artist?
I'm imagining it will always do both. And who knows? I can't predict the future. But
oh, I thought you could.
Yeah, totally. It's just one of my other line items. I know. What other line on my resume? Future story. No, what's it called? I was going to say fortune teller.
Fortune teller?
I was like future storyteller. I don't know.
I got to scratch some questions off this interview then. Sorry.
No, I imagine that the work will always be somewhat grounded in the things that I've talked about today, because it's reflective of my life experience, and I'm always going to want to be making work that feels honest, that feels like my truth, that feels like, that it's just grounded in who I am, that it's grounded in what my passions are. And then inevitably, unless I just decide to be stagnant, which would be unfortunate, I hope that, I will, I don't want to say I hope that, because that's just not, that's like me resigning my own agency. I will continuously be thinking and continuously be, responding to the current environment, to the world around me, to the topics of the time, and to I just, I think it is entirely possible for people to figure out a niche that works and just roll with it for a lifetime. But I don't think that's terribly exciting. It works for some people, and so that's not meant to be like a knock on folks making decisions on what works really well for their life, because we all have different goals. We all have different ways that life is comfortable for us, or ways that life feels fulfilling, and but for me, I get excited about doing something for a period of time, and then I'm usually ready to move on and explore something else, so it will almost inevitably always be rooted in painting and beadwork, because I love doing those things. But it will, it'll have to keep moving throughout time, or I'll get bored.
What advice would you give emerging Native artists that are striving to make their voices heard and seen in the contemporary art world?
So I've been saying the same thing in response to this question for a while now, and I'm going to keep saying it because I think it's so important. So there's lots of advice. We could give really concrete advice on how to build your practice, you write your artist statement, all these types of things. So I'm going to give a little bit of concrete things, and then I want to talk about one larger conceptual thing. A little bit of concrete things. I want to see Native people applying for everything out there that's possible to apply for. So apply for all the things that are specifically written for us, and apply for all of the things that you don't think are specifically written for you. Put your name in the hat. Get really, really, really good at writing applications. Get really, really good at following the directions in those applications. That sounds so basic, but I've gotten to apply. I have applied for so many things throughout my lifetime in like education, scholarships and grants and all that, all the way through my professional career, and you are going to get denials all the time. And like, get comfortable with that. Get comfortable with it and know that it's all right. Know that it's a part of the process. Know that it cannot be your time every time, because sometimes it's somebody else's turn. And that's okay. Know that if you missed it this time, there might be an opportunity that you got to apply for 5, 6, 7, 8 times, etc. But keep refining your application. Get better at applying for things. Ask for advice. Ask for feedback from people that have done it before you, or your old professors, your current professors, whatever, other people in the field. If your mom's a really good writer, ask her to look over it. People who aren't in the arts, ask them if they can understand it. Get feedback. Refine that application skill set just like you refine your practice skill set. It will take you far. And then you have to keep building your practice. Like you can't come with the same thing over and over and over again. You be challenging yourself, be challenging your practice, be like, and once you, like, if you go through, BFA, MFA, that kind of stuff, once you get out, don't stop asking yourself the questions. Like when you're in academia, you have critiques. People are asking you questions about your practice, challenging you to grow all the time. You have to keep doing that for yourself once you graduate. So don't stop pushing. And then the bigger, more conceptual thing that I think is really important is I just really, really, really want to see young Native artists working really hard to figure out what their specific contribution is going to be. It is entirely possible for us. We have this shared. We have these shared histories, right? We're drawing from like very specific shared tribal artistic histories. If you go just to your tribe, right? And then you go beyond that, maybe your region, maybe you go beyond that to indigenous art in the US. Maybe you can broaden that above and below the imposed borders. You can look at indigenous art globally, et cetera, et cetera. But we are pulling from shared histories. And so we will naturally have intersections. We will naturally have intersections in the way that we think about and approach our work because of our shared histories, right?
True.
But it doesn't mean that we're all going to be saying the same thing. And it doesn't mean that the work is all going to look the same. And it doesn't give people an excuse or a pass to be like, well, I'm looking at the same thing as you, so my work looks the same. I don't buy it. I don't think it's enough. I think that and we will inevitably influence one another, which is a really good thing, right? Like we look to our predecessors, we look to our teachers, and sometimes for a period of time in our growth, we will naturally mimic those that we're looking at because we are growing, we're developing our voices. Like kids will, mimic their parents until they figure out, their own identity, right? But I guess what I would like to see, Native youth or people, aspiring artists, to be really thinking about, okay, so I have all of this information. These are the artists I've been looking to. I totally admire. I dig these people. I'm looking at the history of my tribal art forms. I love this. I love this. I love that. I love this. Now, what do I have to bring to that conversation that adds a unique voice within the lineage of this conversation, because we all have something. Joe, you have something that is specifically Joe's journey, right?
Yes.
I have something that's specifically my journey. And so I really think that it is possible for us each to create practices that are tied to who we are, that are connected to community, connected to history, and still uniquely ours. Like our unique individual contribution to the whole,
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think that we're quick to mimic each other. Sometimes I think, and you can see that it's like prolific in the beadwork world. Like it's just, somebody will, and sometimes I think it's all right. Like sometimes I think it could be, kind of like movement building or like,
Yeah.
so I'm not saying there's like a hard, there's no like clear line, but like really just thinking about like, what is inspiration and what is appropriation?
Mm-hmm.
How do I create a practice that is truly me while I'm really showing respect for my peers and not like stepping on them or riding on their coattails to get to the next place, Because what I started off with earlier, like we are wildly talented people, so trust that you got something unique to bring and push for it.
Yeah. And tell your story. Don't let someone else tell your story or retranslate it for you. It's your story. You should be telling it.
Yeah.
Well, Dyani, is there anything coming up, next steps? What's in the future for you that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I'll be exhibiting at the Armory in New York City in September. So I'll have work in the central curated section, and then the Bulkley Gallery will be there, and I will have work there alongside two beloved artists, Jim Denemy and George Morrison. And I'm really
fantastic.
Not going to cry on this podcast, but it's I'm really excited about that. Really, really excited about that. And we are excited to bring what we're going to bring of their work, and the conversation that we want to hopefully put forward, between the bringing the three of our works to the Armory. So if you're going to be in New York in September, come visit us. Tandem Press will also be there exhibiting, and they will be bringing some new prints that I made with Tandem. So it'll be fun to see those in September as well. And then, I mentioned the Jocelyn Museum will open a new building, and Wopila 3 will be a part of that new installation. So that will be, I think that's early fall. That, because it's a new building, there's like the moving target of construction and opening days. And it's a number of public art projects that are in the mix, and those will roll out when they roll out. And then really just buckling down to prepare for the Walker Show in October 2025. We'll be here in no time. So be focusing on that for a while.
A few things in the bucket. Absolutely.
Thank you both. I'm really grateful too. And I look forward to watching other episodes, and just thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. And thank you. We will speak soon.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through Indigenous art and creativity. Stay inspired and keep exploring with us on Beyond the Art.
Remember to subscribe and follow us for more exclusive interviews, insightful discussions, and stories that ignite your artistic imagination.
Until next time, continue to unlock your limitless potential with Beyond the Art. Thank you for listening.